The most big government presidents in United States history.
There was a president who took the top income tax rate to 94 cents on the dollar. 94. He built the machine that reaches into your paycheck before it ever touches your hand, payroll withholding, which is still there every 2 weeks. He created the largest and most permanent entitlement program in American history, one that every working person funds whether they consent to it or not. He built the agency that regulates Wall Street, the alphabet agencies that regulate everything else, and a federal government so much larger than one he inherited that the country was never the same again. And he is not number one on this list. That should tell you something about how far we are going today, because the man I just described, and most of you already know who he is, represents what most people picture when they hear the phrase big government. He is the easy answer, but he is not the biggest answer. Welcome back to the countdown. Last week, we ranked the 5 most libertarian presidents, the ones who left Americans more free. Today, the mirror image, the 5 who left Americans more governed. But I want to be precise about what this list measures, because the comment section is going to argue about it either way, and I would rather we argue about the same thing. This is not a list of the most authoritarian presidents. That would be a different countdown about wars, surveillance, and civil liberties. And some of the names that we have on this list would certainly move. Now, this is a list about the size and reach of government itself. How much of American life the federal government came to touch, to tax, to direct, and to personally occupy that it did not touch before. Think of it as an arrow pointing in one direction. On one end, the government is small, and most of your life is yours to run. On the other end, the government is large, and more of your life runs through Washington. We are ranking the presidents who moved the country hardest towards the second end, and just as importantly, moved it there permanently. One more rule, same as last week. Where a president did real and lasting good, I am going to say so. A big government list is not necessarily a villain list. Some of these men are among the most consequential leaders in this country has ever produced. That is exactly the point. The expansion of government almost never arrives wearing a cartoon eye mask and a curly Q mustache. It arrives promising to solve a real problem, led by a person that historians and the press often remember fondly. But the debate is worth having, the one we have on channels like this, which is whether there was a better way than big government all along. Let us roll up our sleeves and begin the countdown. Number 5. Start with a Republican, because if you came here expecting this list to be about one political party, I want that idea gone by the first entry. Richard Milhous Nixon ran as a conservative. He governed as one of the great expanders of the domestic state. He created the Environmental Protection Agency. He signed the law that became OSHA. He presided over an enormous growth in federal domestic spending and regulation. A Republican president building a regulatory machinery any progressive would have been proud of. And then, in August of 1971, he did something no peacetime president had ever done. He went on television and froze wages and prices across the entire United States economy by executive order. The government would now decide by decree what a thing was allowed to cost and what a man was allowed to be paid. 90 days, he said, a command economy, announced on a Sunday night. In that same speech, he did one more thing. He closed the gold window. He ended the ability to exchange the American dollar for gold, and in doing so, cut the dollar loose from any fixed anchor entirely. From that night forward, we had a fiat currency. The money in your pocket was worth whatever the government and the Federal Reserve said it was worth. No more, no less, and backed by nothing you could hold. Murray Rothbard wrote in the New York Times on that day, "Fascism has come to America." Whether or not you use his word, understand the scale of what happened. A Republican, celebrated as a conservative, seized more direct control over the daily economic life of ordinary Americans than almost anyone before him. and he permanently changed the nature of American money. Did this leave Americans more free and independent, or more controlled by a larger government? A price control on your labor and your monetary savings, a representation of your time and talents that instantly became worth less and under the full control of Washington. If Nixon is on this list for reaching into the economy, our next entry is here for building something that never went away. Number 4, Lyndon Baines Johnson. The defense first, and it is a real one. Johnson used federal power to break the back of legal segregation. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, these expanded the actual liberty of millions of Americans who had been denied it by their own state governments. Any honest, liberty-minded individual has to reckon with the fact here. Federal power enforced freedom. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But the Great Society was far larger than civil rights, and the rest of it was the most sweeping permanent expansion of the domestic entitlement state between the New Deal and the Affordable Care Act. Medicare, Medicaid, a new cabinet department for housing and urban development, federal money, and with it federal control, flowing into education, into cities, into healthcare, into corners of American life the federal government had simply never occupied before. And here's the thing about entitlements. The reason they weigh so heavily on a list like this. A war ends. A tax can be cut. A regulation can be repealed. An entitlement program, once it exists, becomes permanent, woven so deeply into tens of millions of lives that no politician will ever again be able to remove it. Johnson did not just grow the government for his own time. He locked in a larger government for every president who came after him, in both parties. None of them undid it, and none of them will. Did this leave Americans more free or more governed? On civil rights, freer, and thankfully so. On everything else, a permanently larger master. So where number 4 built the modern welfare state, number 3 built the machine that made it all possible. Number 3, Woodrow Wilson. And Wilson is a category of his own, because Wilson is where so much of this actually begins. In a single stretch of years around 1913, the federal government acquired 2 of the most powerful tools it has ever held. The permanent federal income tax through the 16th Amendment, the mechanism that funds everything else on this list, and the Federal Reserve, a central bank with standing power over the nation's money and credit. Those 2 instruments, the power to tax income directly and the power to control the money, are the foundation of the entire modern federal government. Wilson did not just expand the government, he poured the concrete every later expansion would stand upon. He also built the beginnings of the administrative state, the permanent, unelected federal machinery that governs by regulation. And when the country entered into World War, Wilson showed exactly how far he was willing to reach. His government passed the Sedition Act, which made it a federal crime to criticize the government or the war in any way officials deemed disloyal. Under it, Eugene Debs, a man who had run for president 4 times, was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for giving an anti-war speech. When the war ended and Wilson pardoned some 200 people convicted under those laws, he specifically refused to release Debs. He left him in prison. The defense, and it's one his admirers make, is that this was wartime, and every wartime president reaches for extraordinary power. Fair, maybe. To note, however, Wilson did campaign on and win a second term in 1916 by promising to keep Americans out of Europe's wars. But by April 1917, just 3 months into that second term, his promise was broken and America was involving herself directly in the Great War between 3 European cousins, Georgie, Willie, and Nicky. A war that would birth every other great conflict and most of the despotic regimes of the 20th century. Also, the income tax and the Federal Reserve were not wartime measures. They were permanent, and they're still here. And they are the reason every president after him had the tools to grow the government as large as they did. More free or more governed? The Wilson era's foundation of imperialism, taxation, and monetary control set the stage for the entire progressive era and the man who came next. Number 2, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The defense, and at full strength because it is owed. Roosevelt inherited a country in collapse, a quarter of the workforce unemployed, banks failing by the thousands, families genuinely hungry. Millions of Americans believed the entire system was finished, and in that moment he projected calm and action when a great many people saw no reason for hope. Then he led the nation through the largest war in human history to victory. You do not have to admire the policies to understand why he is carved into the country's memory the way that he is. Now, for the record, the New Deal built the modern federal government essentially from scratch. Social Security, the permanent entitlement that reaches nearly every working American, funded whether you consent or not. The Securities and Exchange Commission, and a vast new apparatus of financial regulation. Federal agencies multiplying across the whole of economic life, and the taxes to match. A top income tax rate that climbed during the war to 94%. Together with payroll withholding, the quiet innovation that takes the government share before you ever see your wages. And then the part that his admirers least like to discuss, and the part that this series will not skip. In 1942, Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and roughly 120,000 people of Japanese descent, the majority of them American citizens, charged with no crime, were removed from their homes and held in cages for the duration of the war. Not a foreign enemy, American citizens. Imprisoned by their own government because of their ancestry. I name it directly because a big government is not an abstraction. At its worst, this is what the reach of the state looks like when it decides your rights are conditional. So why is this president only number 2? Because as vast as the New Deal was, one president reached even further, deeper into the structure of the country itself, and more permanently than Roosevelt. But before we get to number 1, the honorable mentions, the ones who did not make the top 5 but earned a place on the wall. Barack Obama. The Affordable Care Act, the stimulus, and a large new expansion of federal control over the healthcare and financial sectors. Joe Biden. Trillions in new spending, sweeping industrial policy, and a federal vaccine mandate it took the courts to ultimately strike down. George W. Bush. No Child Left Behind. TARP. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, the bailout of the banks. And lastly, William McKinley. Because big government is not only about spending at home. McKinley built an overseas American empire. The Spanish-American War, the annexation of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii. The reach of a government is not only measured inside its borders. And now the finale, which leaves one name, and for some of you, it is going to sting. Number 1, Abraham Lincoln. Before a single word of criticism, let me be as clear and as honest as I know how to be. Abraham Lincoln presided over the end of slavery in the United States. 4 million human beings being held as property were made free. There is no larger expansion of actual human liberty in the whole of American history, and nothing I am going to say about it diminishes it by 1 inch. The states that left the Union left it to preserve the right to own other people. That is the truth of what they were defending, and it has to be said plainly and without hedging. Hold that. Now hold this next part alongside it, because both are true at once. Measured by the size and reach of the federal government, Abraham Lincoln expanded it further, faster, and more permanently than any president in American history. Consider what happened in 4 short years. He signed the first federal income tax the country had ever seen. He signed the first genuine national military draft. Conscription, the federal government claiming direct ownership of a man's body and sending him to war. He created a national banking system and a national paper currency where before there had been neither. And he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, the ancient protection that keeps the government from jailing you without charge. and he had civilians arrested and held by military authority, defying even the Chief Justice of the United States when the courts told him to stop. After the war, the Supreme Court ruled in Ex parte Milligan that he never had the power over civilians in the first place. And beneath all of it, the deepest expansion of all, the one that cannot be repealed. Before Lincoln, it was an open and living question whether the United States was a voluntary association that a state could choose to leave. Lincoln settled that question the only way it could be settled, by force. It is not, and you cannot. He settled it with war which he did not avoid or negotiate or compromise. A war that cost the lives of 600,000 plus Americans. Whatever you believe about secession, understand the magnitude of what was decided. The federal government became permanently supreme and inescapable over every state and every citizen within it. Every expansion on this entire list, Wilson's, Roosevelt's, Johnson's, Nixon's, was only possible because Lincoln had already established that there was no exit from the federal government's authority. He did not just grow the government, he made it inescapable. And that is why he is number one, not the cartoon villain of American history, but one of its most notable and lauded figures. And by any honest measure of size and reach, the greatest expander of federal power the country has ever had. Both things are true. A serious person can hold both. Did this leave Americans more free or more governed? Freer if you were enslaved. More governed permanently if you were anyone at all. Here's the thread that runs through all five, and it is the whole reason this segment exists. Not one of these men set out to make Americans less free. Every single expansion arrived as an answer to a real problem. A war, a depression, a segregated South, an inflationary spiral, a nation coming apart. Every one was led by a man history remembers as a giant. That is precisely why it is so hard to see and so important to name. Because government, once it grows, almost never shrinks back. The tax stays, the agency stays, the entitlement stays, the precedent stays, waiting for the next president who needs it. So we ask the question that cuts through all of it, the question we ask about everything on this channel. Did this leave Americans more free or more governed? That is the list. Now tell me in the comments where I am wrong. Tell me Lincoln does not belong at number one, but if you do, tell me which of the others expanded federal power more permanently than the man who made it inescapable. And show your work. I am listening. And if this is your first time here, the same question drives everything we do, including the full series on where the American liberty came from and where it went. It's called Self-Evident, The Road to 1776. Subscribe, and I'll see you over there. Until next time, have a great day.